Hello! The shortlist for this year's Booker Prize has just been announced, and there are some surprises here, at least surprises to me, so I'm going to discuss that. Now, I know some people only start following the prize when the shortlist is announced, so I'm going to give some short summaries of each of these books, as well as any thoughts or feelings I have about any of them, as well as the list as a whole and some interesting facts about that. But first, I have a very exciting announcement to make. For the very first time, the Booker Prize is sponsoring me to follow this year's shortlist. And I know some people have assumed that the Booker Prize has sponsored me before because I've always been a big fan of the prize and followed it really closely. But this is just a really lovely thing. It allowed me to make even more videos and follow the list even more closely and have more discussions with people about the shortlist, because there is a lot to say about all of these books and the list as a whole. Now, I want to make it very clear also that this isn't going to influence my thoughts or opinions about any of the books or the list as a whole. The Booker Prize was really clear when they contacted me to engage me to do this, that they want me to express my real feelings about any of the books or the lists. And so, yeah, that I wouldn't have signed up to do this if it was, it was going to be restricted in that way. So yeah, there'll just be more fun content to come. I have some great things planned, and yeah, this is going to be a great season to follow this year's prize. And yeah, this is a really interesting group of books. Now, I have read 5 out of the 6 of these books, and so yeah, I still have one more to go, Alan Garner's novel. But also, I made a shortlist prediction video, and I did guess 4 out of these 6 books correctly. So yeah, that I'm happy about that, and really happy because yeah, some of these books I think are so extraordinary, and yeah, really glad to see them honored in this way and that more people will be reading them and discussing them. It's a really great thing. But also the 2 books that I hadn't guessed, are quite big surprises to me. And yeah, I'm gonna be very intrigued to see what I make about Alan Garner's books. So looking at the list as a whole, you can see right off that it is split evenly between male and female authors. There's also a wide range of international representation on the list, from an author from Zimbabwe and Sri Lanka and Ireland and England, and 2 authors from America. There is also the oldest author ever to have been listed for the prize, who is Alan Garner, who is currently 87 years old. And totally coincidentally, I mean, this is kind of crazy coincidence, he will turn 88 years old on the day of the Booker Prize winner announcement on October 17th. I mean, what a crazy coincidence that is. And what a great thing if he ends up winning the prize. And what greater way to celebrate your birthday, your 88th birthday, than to have won the Booker Prize. I mean, what an amazing thing. But also on this year's shortlist, there is the shortest book by page length ever to have been listed for the prize, which is Claire Keegan's Small Things Like These, which is only 116 pages long. Now, this is not actually the shortest book on the shortlist. If you're going by word count, Alan Garner's novel is actually shorter by word count than Claire Keegan's book, but just for whatever reason, because of the size of the type or whatever, Claire Keegan's book is shorter in page length. The shortest book to have ever won the Booker Prize is Penelope Fitzgerald's novel Offshore. But that may change with this year's winner announcement. But also, really interestingly, looking at all the books, there is a predominant theme that a lot of these books are based on real-life historical tragic events, both national tragedies and personal tragedies. The way that Glory represents the fall of Mugabe in Zimbabwe in this very creative way, the way that the 7 Moons of Maali Almeida looks at the Sri Lankan Civil War, the way that The Trees references the real-life historic lynching of Emmett Till, and also Small Things Like These, which references the Magdalene laundry scandal in Ireland. So yeah, really interesting things about this year's shortlist. First off, I'm going to talk about Glory, and I am so happy to see this book on the shortlist. Coincidentally, before I found out what was on this year's long list, a couple of people asked me, what is the book you're most hoping to see on the Booker Prize list this year? And just recently I had read Glory. I was totally blown away by it, and I really emphasized and said I really hope Glory is listed, and here it is on this year's shortlist. So I'm so happy about that. And as I said, this is a loose fictionalization of the fall of Mugabe in Zimbabwe, in the country's recent history and the events following that. But she does that by creating a fictional country called Jidada, and also all of the citizens of this country are animals. So it's sort of loosely inspired by George Orwell's Animal Farm in that way. And so it follows political changes and scandals in the country, as well as the journey of a particular individual named Destiny, who had left the country but returns to it and follows her journey in this newly formed country that has a new government. And I was just so struck by the playfulness of the language in this, how evocative it was of the voices of different citizens, as well as like prominent leaders who were sort of shoring up power for themselves. But also it really struck me when it got to Destiny's story and following her path as she wrestles with these notions of nationality and the nation that she was born in but feels slightly distanced from. And so it does reference this specific instance from a nation's history, but also what's covered in this book could be applied to so many governments and nations, and the way that power corrupts, and the many variations of that, and the responses to citizens by that, especially in the modern age, to do with social media and sort of group thought and group speak. And so yeah, just such an excellent novel. The Trees by Percival Everett, another novel that coincidentally I'd read shortly before this year's long list was announced, although it wasn't really that much of a coincidence, because there had been kind of some buzz around this novel, and it just seemed like a book that would get some award attention, and I'm so glad that it did, because it is an extraordinary book. It is basically like a sort of genre detective story, but it is so much more clever and engaging and interesting than that. You know, if you're somebody that doesn't happen to like detective stories, it follows two black detectives in Mississippi that are investigating a very strange crime, and then other strange crimes occur. And so they enter into this predominantly racist town in Mississippi and are interviewing a number of people. And as more murders and cases occur, the stranger events become, and it gets into a kind of investigation into the history of lynching in the American South, and interrogating that, as well as paying tribute and honoring and speaking the names of some victims of those crimes, of those racist crimes, and the nation's history, and how it follows that it deals with this very serious subject matter, and in a really intelligent way. But also the tone of this novel is so funny and quite whimsical in some parts of it. So it is really engaging and pleasurable to read, as well as a book that really makes you think. Treacle Walker by Alan Garner, not Treacle Walker, Treacle Walker, which is the story of a young boy that lives on his own and his independent and quite lonely life, but also an old man that comes along and befriends them. And so it's about the strange relationship that forms between them. I think the tone of the novel is a bit sort of fable-like or kind of like mythic-like, and I have not read this novel yet, because I'd heard some mixed things about it, although some recent responses I've seen to the book have been like very positive and delightful. It is only a very short novel, so it won't take all that long to read, and I'm really intrigued to get to it. Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan, which takes place in a small town in Ireland shortly before Christmas in 1985 and follows a man named Bill who supplies coal and fuel to local small businesses and households, and how he visits a convent where he makes a delivery and discovers something very disturbing that is going on behind the scenes at this convent. It's about how small communities can support each other in a very important way, but also can maintain these silences about things which aren't discussed and which can be quite destructive, especially to the most vulnerable members of those communities, and about this dilemma that Bill is faced with. It follows his story in such a heartrending and beautiful way. The language of this novel is so precise and evocative. I did read this towards the end of last year. It was one of my favorite books that I read last year, and I did read it shortly before Christmas, which is why I think partly I had more of a sentimental reaction to it. It just evokes the feeling of and spirit of Christmas like so strongly, as well as having a very important message about this dark period of Ireland's past. So yeah, I did have a really strong emotional reaction to it in that way, but I think even beyond that, this is such an extraordinary novel, especially for being so short. The Seven Moons of Maali, Almeida by Shehan, Karunatilaka. This is my favorite discovery from this year's Booker list. I went into this with no expectations and was completely delighted and enthralled by this story, which follows a man, Maali Almeida. Shortly after his death, he has a limited period of time to get business done on Earth, and follows that dramatic story as he personally reckons and tries to discover who his killer is, but also uncover or reveal a national scandal of photographs that he took, or what he hopes will become a national scandal, because he is a photographer. He's photographed many wartime scenes as a civil war is occurring in this country, and there are lots of bloody and horrific things that have occurred, and he can see the repercussions of that in the afterlife as he meets some of these ghosts. But the tone of this novel is so playful and engaging and really funny in some parts, but also makes really clever observations about the nature of war and also personal responsibility. Maali Almeida isn't necessarily like a virtuous person, even though he likes to think he can be an agent for good and change, but he also is selfish in a lot of ways, and it explores the complexity of his character in such a compelling way that this is just an absolute joy to read. And finally on this short list of 6 books is Oh, William by Elizabeth Strout, a novel which follows the story of Lucy Barton later in her life after her beloved second husband has died, and how she reconnects with her first husband, who she has very conflicted feelings about, and follows him as he goes on this road trip, a kind of discovery, looking into his family's past, or aspects of his family which he previously hadn't known existed. So it is about their relationship, but also about Lucy Barton's reckoning with her own identity, which she has done in 2 previous books that Elizabeth Strout published. So it is a kind of sequel to those previous books, and I do think that this is a very moving journey, but I have such conflicted feelings about this because I am a huge Elizabeth Strout fan. I've read so many of her books. I think she's such an extraordinary writer, somebody I feel a real personal connection to, because she often writes about the state of Maine, and I am from the state of Maine. But also, I just have this feeling this isn't her strongest novel, or at least when I read it, it didn't strike me as the best book out of this group of books of Lucy Barton. But it will be interesting if I get time to reread this book, and because maybe there are some aspects and things I missed about it, and that's part of the wonderful thing about the Booker Prize and the judges making the choices that they did, that they're really urging readers to take a closer look at books, especially books that you might have loved, that you can think about them a bit more critically, to say, is this the best book that was published this year? But also books that you might not have totally loved the first time you read it, to look at them more closely, consider aspects of it that you might not have thought about before. And I think that it's in some ways easy to overlook or dismiss this book because it is fairly quiet in some ways. It just sort of follows the day-to-day of this road trip that the characters go on, and their experiences and their thoughts and feelings, and is written in this very readable style. She writes wonderfully, but it's the language of this I think is very easy to read. So yeah, it is a great pleasure to read. Now there is also this question, because this is actually the third book. There's a fourth book coming very soon, and this I think is another first for the Booker Prize, of an author that has written a series of books about the same character. And there's a fourth book before the winner is announced on October 17th. On October 6th, this fourth book in the Lucy Barton series, Lucy by the Sea, is going to be published. And this also follows Lucy Barton in her connections with William, when William invites her to come back to Maine to stay with him, and so is about more of their connections. And I've not read it yet, but it'll be really fascinating to read this, and as well as examining the first three books in the series. Now, I would say it does really benefit from reading the first two books before reading this book, to really understand Lucy Barton's character. That's just my personal feelings. Actually, my husband, when he was asked about that, because he's also read this book and the other books in the series, he says, you really don't need to have read those other books to enjoy and appreciate this novel, Oh William. So yeah, if you're going to take his advice, you can just read this book independently. But other people I know that have read the first two books before getting this also, you will obviously get more out of this book and understand the dynamics of Lucy Barton's complex character when coming to this book. But yeah, you can just read it on its own. Sorry, that was a slightly rambly discussion about Elizabeth Strout's novel, but it is a really interesting book to consider, and about why it might be a prize-worthy contender. And I know some readers who are big fans of it will really agree with that and are going to be really happy that it's on this year's shortlist. So yeah, these are the 6 novels up for this year's award. Out of 169 novels that were submitted for this year's prize, these are the 6. And what book out of this list might be given the honor of the best book published in the past year? It'll be really interesting to find. I'd love to hear your thoughts about and feelings about this. If you have any early contenders of who you think might win this year, if you're interested in reading this year's shortlist, what books you're most interested in, or if you've read all of them, what do you think about the list as a whole? I would love to hear about that in the comments below. But also, I also have to express my regret that 2 books that from the long list that I really loved, both Night Crawling and The Colony, and that I was hoping were going to be shortlisted for this year's prize, didn't quite make it. But yeah, I'd really encourage you to read both of these books as well. I think they are really incredible, really engaging, really smart, and such wonderful reads. So yeah, I would recommend those as well. But yeah, let me know what you think about the shortlist in the comments below, and we can have more discussions about that. The winner is going to be announced on October 17th, and tonight there is going to be a party celebrating this year's Booker shortlist, which is why I'm wearing a jacket. I'm all gussy teed up for it. So yeah, that'll be a really like fun event to go to, and so I'm sure I'll be posting about that on like Twitter and Instagram and stuff. So yeah, that'll be really fun to do. But yes, I will be following this year's prize even more closely, making more videos about it, and I'd love for you to follow along with me and read these books, because yeah, there is so much to say about them. So thank you for watching. I hope you're reading good things, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.